looked upon, blend in with the rest of the church crowd. I know the routine, and I could list the other Bible studies in town. Watch Christian TV, I know all the preachers, their cliches. Been born again, without a doubt I know I'm saved. But sometimes I hurt, and sometimes I cry. Sometimes I can't get it right, no matter how hard I seem to try. Sometimes I fall down, stumble over my own disguise. I try to look strong as the whole world looks on, but sometimes alone I cry. I try to speak faith, never give that old devil 1 inch to get in. Do worship and pray, let everybody know just where that I stand. On the back of my ride is a fish and a cross for the world to see. I know God is good all of the time, yes, there's no doubt for me. But sometimes I hurt, and sometimes I cry. Sometimes I can't get it right, no matter how hard I seem to try. Sometimes I fall down, stumble over my own disguise. I try to look strong as the whole world looks on, but sometimes alone I cry. Sometimes I fall down, stumble over my own disguise. I try to look strong as the whole world looks on, but sometimes alone I cry. I try to look strong as the whole world looks on, sometimes alone I cry.
I got to say I've been most grateful for the ability that our church has had electronically to broadcast the service, because there are a lot of people that are shut in that watch it. And now I understand there's quite a number of people overseas that are watching us every service. However, Wednesday night, we went live stream only, because a lot of sicknesses and stuff like that in the church. And I wasn't feeling so swell, so Candy said she'd do the entire service. So she goes over to her husband's studio, and they got all them fancy lights and the white background, and you know.
It's just a paper background.
Anyway. And she did the music, the prayer time, the announcements, and the message. And she broke all records in viewership for that night, because nearly 400 people has watched her. And somebody wrote to me and said, she's going to get your job. And I said, well, she will if I die of old age here before long anyway. So that's all right. She's getting primed for it. But I'm really grateful. But now here's the problem. I was trained in radio. I've been in radio since the early 80s, quite a bit. And, but when I come in here today, Candy sets the camera up, and right at 11 o'clock, and we weren't ready, she hit broadcast on there. And I went, whoa, what are you doing? And she said, that's okay. We said we would be on at 11, and they can watch us getting ready and all of that, you know. And boy, the knee jerk was just killing me. Not to do that, but actually it's a good idea, because people start logging on, and by the time the service actually starts, they're all ready.
Exactly.
Well, see, I used to teach DJs for the Columbia School of Broadcasting back in the late 80s. And they would come in and I would instruct them. You believe me, instructing other people how to run their mouth effectively. Yeah. Well, anyway, the cardinal rule, if you're going to work in radio, is there is to be no dead air. Not even 2 seconds. Because we were always taught that the moment you stop talking or their music stops going on the radio station, what do the listeners do? They immediately go to another channel because they like to hear that noise. And so, here was dead air coming up, and I was about to bust a spring, but actually it is a far better thing to go on and do it and let people start logging on. So I will try not to get so conflicted.
Breathe, Pastor, breathe.
Yes. That is so pathetic, isn't it? That is so pathetic. I must confess I feel 100% better this morning. The truck was still backing over me when I went to bed last night. And it's a very difficult thing to be married to a woman who is tougher than you are. And I cannot allow her to show me up or embarrass me. So I have to drag and go do whatever, because around 6 o'clock, she looked at me and she said, "How you feeling?" And I said, "I don't know. I ain't slept at all last night." And she says, "Well, I'm good." And she'd been feeling worse than I had. And I said, "You are?" She said, "Yeah, I'm good. Let's get up and go." And I started whining. It's really bad. And she said, "Well, why don't you sleep to such and such a time and get up and see how you're doing?" But she was going to make sure I come in here anyway, so. And we're kind of running out of people to do it, and so I figured I'd better come on in, but the Lord always provides, and I am feeling a lot better. I'm going to kind of stay out of everybody's face for a few more days, and but nonetheless, I am doing good. She is tougher than a $2 steak. I've never seen nothing like her. If the cannibals ever caught her, they'd have to boil her for a week before they could eat her. Nice to be married at most times to a tough woman because she motivates you. Anyway, we're going to be looking in Mark chapter 5 in just a couple of minutes, but I got a question, and it was a song that Bill and Linda used to always sing, and the question is, just how badly do you want to get to Jesus? And in these days that we've been dealing with, 2020, and then Lord knows what's coming in this year and so forth, I think people need to start seeking the face of Jesus more than they ever had in their lives. But the question is, just how bad do you want to do it? And what has he got to do to get you to do that? We're going to look at the story of a woman here in Mark chapter 5 and verse number 25. That said, a certain woman which had an issue of blood for 12 years. She couldn't stop that bleeding, the hemorrhaging, if you would, for 12 years. And in those days, to even go out in public in that condition, because they did not have the methods of things like we do today, it had to be publicly embarrassing. But this woman wanted to be healed. And so she had to weigh which is more important, a miracle or a little embarrassment. And that's kind of something we've got to look at today as well. Said she had suffered many things of many physicians. Boy, that tells me nothing's changed. Now you go to the doctor, you sit in the parking lot for 4 hours. Your fever is broken and you're healed by the time they get to you.
They still charge you though.
I remember one time when I was 16, I was working for the city of Lynchburg, and I'd been outside cutting trees and weeds and stuff all day long, and I had the flu and I didn't know it. And I thought it was just because I'd had too much sun. And so my folks took me over to the emergency room, and I laid back in the examination room where nobody had seen me for hours, about 4 or 5 hours. My fever broke. I felt better. I got up and walked out to the hospital, and I don't know if they know I'm still there or not. But this woman had suffered many things of many physicians, and had spent all that she had. That's another one that hadn't changed a lot. You know, boy, you go one stay in the emergency room will wipe you out. And it said she was nothing bettered. Again, a whole lot like today. But she rather grew worse. I remember I took my oldest daughter. She'd had a rash covering her entire torso, and I took her 3 times to the emergency room. The first time they said, "We don't know what it is, so we're going to send you home." Went back again. "We don't know what it is, but we're going to give you this pill." The third time I opened my mouth and I said, "You will not send her home, and you will find out what it is." And finally they did. But this lady had rather grew worse. And when she had heard of Jesus, she came in the press behind. There's the press out there messing things up again like they always do. And touched his garment. Now this is really interesting. I mean, it's hundreds and hundreds of people thronging him, and it's kind of, picture what a rock concert looks like. You know, everybody's up there dancing. If somebody passed out, they would never hit the floor. They just carry them along in a wave. That's kind of what it looked like. And she said, "If I may but touch his clothes, I shall be whole." What great faith. If I could just get up there and just touch the hem of his robe, I could be healed. And straightway the fountain of her blood was dried up. It stopped after 12 years by merely touching the garment of Jesus. And she felt in her body that she was healed of that plague. Now, Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that virtue, or literally power, had gone out of him, turned him about in the press, and he said, "Who touched my clothes?" And his disciples said, "You see a multitude thronging you, and you're going to say, 'Who touched me?'" And he didn't answer them. He kept looking around like, "Who did it? Who did it?" There was a purpose for why he did that. He knew who did it. He knew exactly who had touched him, but he was waiting for that woman to step forward and confess him. That's a lot of the things that happen in your life. It's no surprise to the Lord. It might be a surprise to you, but he's testing you. He wants you to acknowledge him in everything. That's why a lot of these things come along. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what was done in her, came and fell down before him and told him all the truth. Again, he already knew. He was waiting for her to tell it. And he said unto her, "Daughter, your faith has made you whole. Go in peace and be whole of your plague." Now, I have 3 questions today, or 3 sections actually, and we've done the first, but here's the second set of questions. And this sounds odd, but are you willing to stop being polite to get to Jesus? I'll give you an example of how I just forgot all about how to be polite. One night I had been in a recording studio up at Timberlake, and it was a soundproof studio, and so me and the guy that was in there running it never heard the horrible storm that hit outside that evening and actually dumped 2 or 3 inches of rain. It was so bad that streams had already overflowed and roads were underwater, and I'd never heard it. We were doing a radio program. And so I got in my car and drove home, and I still had not seen that rain had fallen until I got over into Amherst County, and I noticed a lot of puddles. Well, when I went down this hill where there was a twin set of bridges to go up to my house, the entire thing was underwater. And being as safety-minded and conservative as I am, I drove right through the middle of it. And all of a sudden, it picked my Toyota station wagon up and started to float, and it was going to go downstream. That was going to be the it for my car, and it for me if I was stupid enough to stay in there. The motor stopped running, and all I could think of, and I wasn't polite at all, I yelled, "Jesus, you got to help me right now." I didn't give him any of the opening statements that we normally do when we pray or anything. I just yelled at him, "You got to help me right now." And all of a sudden, soon as I did that, my motor kicked over. And I put it in reverse and floored it, and it paddled me back out of the thing right before I went washing down the stream there. It scared me to death. But I got the point across, and the Lord answered that without making me be polite. Are you willing to stop being politically correct to get to Jesus? Are you willing to violate all the protocol to get to him? In other words, just how badly do you really need the Lord to intervene in the situations in your life? In Mark chapter 10, we see one that was desperate. And when you finally do get desperate for the Lord, that's when he does his best work. God is not a spare tire, my friend. And a lot of times we wait till everything goes wrong to strap that spare tire on, but he's not a spare tire. He is there in the good and the bad, and he wants to be praised and thanked and prayed to in all of those situations. They came to Jericho, and as they went out of Jericho with his disciples, and a great number of people, blind Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus, sat by the highway side begging. If you were crippled or blind or any other type of handicap in those days, you had to depend on literally begging to live. There was nothing that you could do. There were no programs that you could get involved in. And here he sat by the highway side begging. Now, when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth coming by, he began to cry out, hollering, "Jesus, thou son of David, have mercy on me." That should be the cry of us all. We should all be feeling about like blind Bartimaeus and feel that desperate that we need the Lord. Because whether we know it or not, we are desperate. We do need him that badly. Even though the devil tells you you don't need anything. And so don't worry that somebody would hear you do that. You go right ahead and cry out for him no matter where you are and what's going on in your life. And many charged Bartimaeus and said that he should be quiet. But he cried the more, a great deal. He got louder and louder, and he kept hollering, "Jesus, thou son of David, have mercy on me." Because he had heard about him and what he could do. And so Jesus stood still and commanded him to be called. And they called the blind man, saying unto him, "Be of good comfort and rise, he calls for you." And he, casting away his garment, rose, and he came to Jesus. And Jesus answering and said unto him, "What will you that I should do unto thee?" And the blind man said, "Lord, that I might receive my sight." And Jesus said unto him, "Go your way, your faith hath made you whole." And immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus in the way. Jesus gave him his miracle, and in turn he decided to follow Christ. Just how desperate do you want him? Are you willing to make that kind of a cry and a plea for him, no matter who's listening, who's watching, or whatever? That's absolutely amazing. Usually at altar call, I know some people get nervous and they look around and see who's watching them and go, "Oh, I want to go down there so bad. But they're going to think I'm doing this, and they're going to think." It doesn't make no difference what they think.
That's right.
You stand before God by yourself. I remember we were in Nelson County back in the 80s. And Don and I used to travel around working with a gospel station as well. They would have what was called a radio rally, and they would have them in different towns that the station could be heard in. They would bring in singers and preachers and hold revival services, and it was kind of a fundraiser to keep the station on the air. Well, we were in a little church in Nelson County one night. It was kind of rainy outside in the fall. And the little church was packed. And the pastor preached a very, very simple sermon, most simple sermon in the world. It was when Paul and Silas were in jail. And I know it didn't last 5 minutes. And when he gave the invitation, this guy got up and he ran hard as he could down that aisle, and he throwed himself on that altar. I mean, it's a wonder he didn't break it. Crying and weeping and repenting and hanging on to it like he was going to fall off the face of the earth. And come to find out, he was the #1 drug kingpin in Nelson County. I don't know why he came to that service, but he didn't leave the same way. And there was such a change in him that we got a call at the radio station and the voice said, "You have ruined our business, and we're going to kill you if you show back up in Nelson County again." And of course, the pastor, always being as spiritually minded as he was, he'd always look at me and go, "Brother Dave, you got your pistol on?" And I'd go, "Yes, sir, I do, Pastor." He said, "Come on then, let's go do that service." And the drug dealer showed up again and again and again, and he said, "I want y'all to know I'm still saved." He was desperate, and he didn't care who saw it, and he ran up that aisle like there was nobody else in that building. That's the way it ought to be. Now, we're going to shift gears a little bit. What about your friends and your loved ones? Are you more concerned about offending them than keeping them out of hell? Sometimes you're going to have to pick. Whether you're going to make your loved one or friend mad at you, and maybe they'll think about it and get saved, or you're going to smooth over what's going on in their life and tell them they're okay all the way to hell. I want you to think about that. Because what you say and what you may do will make a big difference in your friend or loved one's life. I have actually seen people change the theology of the Bible to suit the lifestyles of their children or their family. One of their children is living this way, or one of the relatives is living that way, and they go, "Well, we need to take another look at the Bible because I believe that's all right." Because they're afraid of offending their family member, and that is so tragic. You should love your family members, but you should be willing to tell them what the truth is. And it says here in Mark chapter 2 and verse 1, Jesus again entered into Capernaum after some days, and it was noised that he was in the house. That's a new expression, by the way. And straightway many were gathered together, insomuch there was no room to receive them. No, not so much as about the door. And he preached the word unto them. So crowded you couldn't even get in. It was just slammed. I remember back in the 70s, I worked with the Word of Life clubs out of Thomas Road. And we had clubs meeting in different districts of Lynchburg and Amherst County and Campbell County and even Nelson County, and it was about 15 or more of those clubs. Well, there was a gentleman downtown lived near Fifth Street, and I'll just say his first name's Kenny Ray. And he got saved at one of those Word of Life Club meetings. And he wanted to get people in there more than anything in the world. And he had just gotten saved now. You got to remember, this guy was like the boss of the street up there. And he asked the Word of Life Club leader, "What have I got to do to get all of my friends and loved ones in here?" And the Word of Life Club leader wasn't thinking, and he said, "Kenny Ray, just do whatever you got to do, brother." So the next Monday night, when they had a Word of Life Club meeting, the Word of Life teacher showed up, and he could not get into this big building because it was so packed, and they were literally surrounding the building. And he finally got everybody out of the way to where he could get in there. And when he got inside, he found Kenny Ray, and he said, "Kenny Ray, what did you do to get these people in?" He said, "I told them we were going to all have free wine tonight." That's not exactly the right way to do that, but his heart was right. I give him that much. But they did hear the gospel that night. And so it was so crowded they couldn't get in. And they come unto him, bringing one sick of the palsy, which was carried by 4. They had him like on a stretcher. And when they could not come near unto him for the press, there's that press problem again, they uncovered the roof where he was, and when they had broken it up, they let down the bed wherein the sick of the palsy lay. They took and let him down through the roof to where he'd come right in front of Jesus. They loved their friend. They were willing to do whatever they had to do for his healing. And when Jesus saw their faith, he said unto the one that was sick of the palsy, "Son, your sins are forgiven you." And there were certain of the scribes that were there. They were doctors of the law. We have a lot of them nowadays. And they were reasoning in their hearts and saying, does this man speak blasphemies? Who can forgive sins but God only? They were right. But what they did not understand is that Jesus was God. And he had the right and the authority to forgive sins here. And immediately when Jesus perceived in his spirit that they so reasoned within themselves, he said unto them, "Why reason ye these things in your heart? Which is easier to say to the sick of the palsy, your sins are forgiven, or to say, arise and take up your bed and walk? Which is easier to say?" And he said, "So that you may know that the Son of Man has power on earth to forgive sins." And then he turned to the sick and he said, "I say unto you, arise, take up your bed, and go your way into your own house." And immediately he arose, picked up his bed, and went forth before them, insomuch that they were all amazed and glorified God, and said, "We have never seen it on this fashion." This man got a miracle not because of his own faith, but because of the faith of his friends. They thought enough of him, and there's no mention of this man's faith at all, that they were going to take him to the Lord. And that's how a lot of people in your family and your friends and your acquaintances get saved, because you think enough of them to take them to Jesus. You think enough of them to invite them to church, or to witness to them, or to do whatever you got to do. And a lot of times we don't realize the gravity of the situation, and how maybe however much on the edge of the cliff your friend or your loved one may be. I remember back in August of 1969, the worst hurricane I believe that Virginia ever got, Hurricane Camille. We got 25 to 26 inches of rain in a 24-hour period. It never stopped. And it literally wiped Nelson County and parts of Amherst County right off the